The First Minister of Scotland resigns. Here's her speech.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming along. I'm sorry to break into your half-term break. Being First Minister of Scotland is, in my admittedly biased opinion, the very best job in the world. It is a privilege beyond measure, one that has sustained and inspired me in good times and through the toughest hours of my toughest days. I am proud to stand here as the first female and longest serving incumbent of this office. And I'm very proud of what has been achieved in the years I've been in Bute House. However, since my very first moments in the job, I have believed that part of serving well would be to know, almost instinctively, when the time is right to make way for someone else. And when that time came, to have the courage to do so, even if to many across the country and in my party, it might feel too soon. In my head and in my heart, I know that time is now, that it is right for me, for my party, and for the country. And so today I am announcing my intention to step down as First Minister and leader of my party. I have asked the National Secretary of the SNP to begin the process of electing a new party leader, and I will remain in office until my successor is elected. I know there will be some across the country who feel upset by this decision and by the fact I am taking it now. Of course, for balance, there will be others who will, how should I put this, cope with the news just fine. Such is the beauty of democracy. But to those who do feel shocked, disappointed, perhaps even a bit angry with me, please know that while hard, and be in no doubt, this is really hard for me, my decision comes from a place of duty and of love. Tough love, perhaps, but love nevertheless for my party and above all for the country. Let me set out as best as I can my reasons. First, though I know it will be tempting to see it as such, this decision is not a reaction to short-term pressures. Of course, there are difficult issues confronting the government just now, but when is that ever not the case? I have spent almost 3 decades in frontline politics, a decade and a half on the top or second top rung of government. When it comes to navigating choppy waters, resolving seemingly intractable issues, or soldiering on when walking away would be the simpler option, I have plenty of experience to draw on. So if this was just a question of my ability or my resilience to get through the latest period of pressure, I wouldn't be standing here today, but it's not. This decision comes from a deeper and longer term assessment. I know it might seem sudden, but I have been wrestling with it, albeit with oscillating levels of intensity for some weeks. Essentially, I've been trying to answer 2 questions. Is carrying on right for me? And more importantly, is me carrying on right for the country, for my party, and for the independence cause I have devoted my life to? I understand why some will automatically answer yes to that second question. But in truth, I have been having to work harder in recent times to convince myself that the answer to either of them, when examined deeply, is yes. And I've reached the difficult conclusion that it's not. The questions are inextricably linked, but let me First Minister for over 8 years, and I was Deputy First Minister for the best part of 8 years before that. These jobs are a privilege, but they are also rightly hard, and especially in the case of First Minister, relentlessly so. Now, to be clear, I'm not expecting violins here, but I am a human being as well as a politician. When I entered government in 2007, My niece and youngest nephew were babies, just months old. As I stepped down, they are about to celebrate their 17th birthdays. Now that I think about it, that's exactly the age to be horrified at the thought of your auntie suddenly having more time for you. My point is this: giving absolutely everything of yourself to this job is the only way to do it. The country deserves nothing less. But in truth, that can only be done by anyone for so long. For me, it is now in danger of becoming too long. A First Minister is never off duty. Particularly in this day and age, there is virtually no privacy. Even ordinary stuff that most people take for granted, like going for a coffee with friends or for a walk on your own, becomes very difficult. And the nature and form of modern political discourse means that there is a much greater intensity, dare I say it, brutality, to life as a politician than in years gone by. All in all, and actually for a long time without it being apparent, it takes its toll on you and on those around you. And if that is true in the best of times, it has been more so in recent years. Leading this country through the COVID pandemic is by far the toughest thing I've done. It may well be the toughest thing I ever do. I certainly hope so. Now, by no stretch of the imagination was my job the hardest in the country during that time. But the weight of responsibility was immense. And it's only very recently, I think, that I've started to comprehend, let alone process, the physical and mental impact of it on me. So what I'm really saying is this: if the only question was, can I battle on for another few months, then the answer is yes, of course I can. But if the question is, can I give this job everything it demands and deserves for another year, let alone for the remainder of this parliamentary term, give it every ounce of energy that it needs in the way that I have strived to do every day for the past 8 years, the answer honestly is different. And as that is my conclusion, hard though it has been for me to reach it, then given the nature and scale of the challenges the country faces, I have a duty to say so now. I feel that duty first and foremost to our country, to ensure that it has the energy of leadership that it needs, not just today, but through the years that remain of this parliamentary term. And right now, in a very particular sense, I feel that duty to my party too. We are at a critical moment. The blocking of a referendum as the accepted constitutional route to independence is a democratic outrage. But it puts the onus on us to decide how Scottish democracy will be protected and to ensure that the will of the Scottish people prevails. My preference of using the next Westminster election as a de facto referendum is well known. I've never pretended it is perfect, no second best option ever is, nor that there are no alternatives. That is why I've always been clear that the decision must be taken by the SNP collectively, not by me alone. But I know my party well enough to understand that my view as leader would carry enormous, probably decisive weight when our conference meets next month. And I cannot, in good conscience, ask the party to choose an option based on my judgment, whilst not being convinced that I would be there as a leader to see it through. By making my decision clear now, I free the SNP to choose the path it believes to be the right one, without worrying about the perceived implications for my leadership, and in the knowledge that a new leader will steer us, I believe, successfully on that path. Now, there are two further reflections that have weighed in my decision. These, I suppose, are more about our political culture and the nature and impact of the dominance and longevity that come from success in politics. And the first, I hope my party will take heart from. One of the difficulties in coming to terms with this decision is that I am confident that I can and would lead the SNP to further electoral success. We remain by far the most trusted party in Scotland. And while for every person in Scotland who loves me, there is another who, let's say, might not be quite so enthusiastic, we are firmly on course to win the next election, while our opponents remain adrift. But the longer any leader is in office, the more opinions about them become fixed and very hard to change. And that matters. Individual polls come and go, but I am firmly of the view that there is now majority support for independence in Scotland. But that support needs to be solidified, and it needs to grow further if our independent Scotland is to have the best possible foundation. To achieve that, we must reach across the divide in Scottish politics. And my judgment now is that a new leader will be better able to do this. Someone about whom the mind of almost everyone in the country is not already made up, for better or worse. Someone who is not in polarised opinions, fair or unfair, as I now am. The good news, as the country will now get to see more clearly perhaps, is that the SNP is full of talented individuals more than up to that task. My second reflection is related. I feel more and more each day now that the fixed opinions people increasingly have about me, as I say, some fair, others little more than caricature, are being used as barriers to reasoned debate in our country. Statements and decisions that should not be controversial at all quickly become so. Issues that are controversial end up almost irrationally so. Too often I see issues presented and as a result viewed not on their own merits but through the prism of what I think and what people think about me. I've always been of the belief that no one individual should be dominant in any system for too long. But while it's easy to hold that view in the abstract, it is much harder to live by it. With this decision, I am trying to do so. Indeed, if all parties were to take this opportunity to depolarise public debate just a bit, to focus more on issues than on personalities, and to reset the tone and the tenor of our discourse, then this decision, right for me and I believe for my party and the country, might also prove to be good for our politics. I certainly live in hope. Now, a couple of final points before I take a few questions. While I am stepping down from leadership, I am not leaving politics. There are many issues I care deeply about and hope to champion in future. One of these is the promise, the national mission so close to my heart to improve the life chances of care experienced young people and ensure they grow up nurtured and loved. My commitment to these young people will be lifelong. And obviously, there is independence. Winning independence is the cause I have dedicated a lifetime to. It is a cause I believe in with every fibre of my being. And it is a cause I am convinced is being won. I intend to be there as it is won every step of the way. Yesterday morning, I attended the funeral of a very, very dear friend and long-standing independence activist, a wonderful man by the name of Alan Angus. It was actually during that funeral service that I went from being 99% certain about this decision to 100% certain, though I know Alan would not be at all happy to have played any part in my departure, so I'm sorry, Alan. But his funeral reminded me that the cause of independence is so much bigger than any one individual, that all of us who believe in it contribute in different ways at different stages of our lives. Since I was 16, I have contributed as an activist, a campaigner, and a leader. And so now, as we look to what I firmly believe is the final stage in Scotland's journey to independence, albeit a hard one, I hope to use all the experience and perspective I've gathered over these years to help get us there. Lastly, there will be time in the days to come for me and others to reflect on what has been achieved during my time as First Minister. I'm pretty certain there will be plenty of commentary on my mistakes as well. I will have more to say before I demit office, but allow me some brief reflections now. Scotland is a changed country since 2014, and in so many ways it is changed for the better. Young people from deprived backgrounds have never had a better chance of going to university than now. Our investment to double early learning and childcare as use of power and fun, create hush, and today final you the privilege usually are.
You now owe Douglas Ross, if anyone can, and what is the timetable now for your replacement? And on a slightly lighter note, do you now owe Douglas Ross £100?
No matter how many times you ask it of me over the next few weeks, no matter how many inventive ways you find of asking it, I am not going to say who my preference will be to succeed me. What I do know is that the SNP is awash with talented individuals. One of the things that I've often reflected on is that when a political party, any political party in any country has very dominant individuals, others, through no fault of the dominant individual, I should say, and not sometimes for the want of trying, often others become a bit eclipsed there. So what I am looking forward to, and I think the country will enjoy over these next few weeks, is seeing that talent and seeing the array of talent. I believe I have led this country closer to independence. I believe we are in the final phase of that journey. I think it will be hard because now we have the dual challenge, the one we always had of convincing a majority, a solid, sustainable majority of the merits of independence, but also secondly, a challenge that is new of finding, in the face of Westminster anti-democratic opposition, that democratic route to allowing the will of the Scottish people to be expressed. And I believe that my successor, I firmly believe that my successor, whoever he or she may be, will lead Scotland to independence, and I'll be there cheering him or her on every single step of the way. Conor Gillis from Sky.
Thanks, First Minister. You say that you've been wrestling with this decision for a number of weeks now, and it's not in reaction to some issues over the last couple of weeks, couple of months. Do you believe, though, that the issues, and particularly the row around transgender prisoners, was the straw that broke the camel's back here? And second of all, has it been a failure of your leadership not to have delivered independence, since that was your sort of founding mission back in 2014?
I'll leave other people to be the judge of my leadership. It's probably a bit invidious beyond saying what I'm proud of, and taking this country ever closer to independence is one of those things. It's a bit invidious for me to cast that judgment. No, that issue wasn't the final straw. Look, I'm long enough in the tooth. I've been in politics, as all of you know, for a long, long time. I'm not going to stand here and insult your intelligence and say that I live in a world that is divorced from the realities of what is going on around me. But it's not the case that this decision is because of short-term issues. I've faced more short-term issues from time to time over my years in politics than I care to remember. And if it was just that, I wouldn't be standing here today. What I would say, though, is this, and I did allude to this in my remarks. I suppose when I look at some of the issues that...
I'm not so sure of that. She doesn't really seem convinced of that. Doesn't seem like she believes that, to be honest.
That are being hotly debated in Scotland right now. One of the things that I do regret, I suppose, is not being able to bring a more rational approach to these debates. And I think that goes back to some of what I said earlier. These debates, some of them, one in particular, the whole notion of logic is obviously controversial in its own right. But I think layered on to the top of that, there has been people's views about me, about independence, and suddenly debates that should be rational and that we should be capable as a country of having rationally become something very different.
Let's try and unpack that for a second. Let's try and de-emotionalize this for a second. Let's try and intellectualize this for a second. Let's try and rationalize this for a second.
I will always be a voice for inclusion, for equality, for human rights and dignity. I have been, am, and will always be a feminist. I will fight for women's rights, and I will stand up against threats to women's rights every day that I have breath in my body. But I'll also stand up for any stigmatised, discriminated against, marginalised and vulnerable group in society. And I believe, and call me an optimist. Not many people call me an optimist, but I am at heart an optimist. I believe these things can and must, in any progressive, liberal, inclusive society, find ways of coexisting. And whatever role I play in politics in the future, I will always seek to do everything I can to turn that into a reality. Colin Mackay.
How have you gone from having plenty in the tank 3 weeks ago to an empty tank today? What is it that's changed over the last few weeks? You've mentioned some things. The only thing you didn't mention is the police inquiry into the party's finances.
Look, these things are not the reason I'm standing here today. These are not factors, nor will my decision today affect these things, and all of these things will take their course. I said something in my remarks that I appreciate will divide opinion in Scotland. I'm a human being, and every human being every day wrestles with a whole load of conflicting emotions. And over the last number of weeks, probably since around the turn of the year, I've been struggling with just that. I get up in the morning and I tell myself, and usually I convince myself that I've got what it takes to keep going and keep going and keep going. But then I realise that's maybe not as true, and you go through a process of just deciding where it is in that decision you're going to fall, and that's the decision I've come to today. I could go on for another few months, I don't know, 6 months, a year maybe, but I know that as time passed, I would have less and less energy to give to the job, and I can't do the job on anything other than a 100% basis. The country deserves nothing less than that. So that's the judgment I've come to. If that's my feeling, that I'm going to get in a relatively short space of time to where I am today, then I owe it to the country to say it now, so that new leadership can be in place. And as I said, in relation to my party, I don't want to stand at a special conference, a month or so from now, and ask my party to take my judgment, opt for a path, knowing that I have doubts about my ability to see it through as leader. This is a better thing to do today for me, for my party, and I believe for the country too. James Cook.
First Minister, I think it's fair to say that the NHS is in a really serious situation. The attainment gap between rich and poor pupils, which you'd said was one of your core missions as First Minister, remains pretty wide. And despite what you're saying today, polls suggest that you've got nowhere near creating a sustained majority for independence. Do you have regrets about one or any of those issues?
Oh, again, James, I'm a human being. I don't know if you've got regrets about things in your life. Of course, I've got regrets about all sorts of things in my life. And as I reflect on my time as First Minister, there'll be things I am hugely proud of, and things that I regret. And if I had my time again, I might do differently. And forgive me, there'll be plenty of time for me to do that. I'm sure be plenty of time for you to do that, and I'm sure you will. So, yeah, but I'm proud of my time as First Minister. But I'm also proud that I know when it's time to move on and to pass on to someone else. The country, the cause I believe in, my party, everything is bigger than any politician, no matter who they are and no matter how dominant they've been for no matter how much time. Politicians come and go all the time. The country is what matters, and the future of the country is what matters. I'm proud of the part I have played and hope to continue to play in a different capacity in building the future of this country. But I think in terms of leadership, it's time for someone else. I think the easier sometimes thing to do, and the thing that traditionally politicians tend to do, is just to cling on and on and on and on and on until everybody is sort of pushing for you to go. It's harder because there's always reasons not to. Yeah, if I stay a bit longer, I can do this. If I stay a bit longer, something might happen. It's always easier to find the reasons not to make a decision. I think it's better to make the decision when you know in your heart that it's the right one for you and for your country. I'm not sure I want to say this sentence actually. I will be 53 this year. I entered Parliament, when I was 29. I've been in government since I was 37. I have literally done this in one capacity or another for all of my life. I've been Nicola Sturgeon, the politician, for all of my life. It's been a privilege. I have done things, met people, gone places, had experiences I would never have done. I have a depth of gratitude to the party that I lead, to the country that I serve, that I can never find the words to express. But having reached this stage in my life, maybe I want to spend a bit of time on Nicola Sturgeon the person, the human being, and contribute differently. And does that sound in some ways selfish? I hope it doesn't, because I have given and will, in whatever way I can, continue to give everything I can in service to this country. But I need for me, and I think it's right for the country, to do that in a different way in future, and that is what I'm seeking to do. And the more I talk, the more convinced I am that this is the right decision for me. I'll take Louise Scott from ITV. I'm going to end up doing what I said I wouldn't do. I'm not going to do that. Louise.
First Minister, we've heard rumblings of divisions within the party in recent weeks, particularly around certain issues. Ultimately, did you lose trust in your leadership from certain key members of your party?
I think you'd have to ask individuals to give their views on my leadership. I think any objective analysis would suggest that that's not true. I enjoy the risk of sounding immodest here, which, as you know, I never like to do. But I, even in times that would be described, have been described by most of you as tough, I enjoy approval ratings after 8 years in government that most leaders would give their right arm for. So, yes, of course, the longer any leader is in office, the more people will find things to disagree with you on, because nobody agrees with any other person 100%. And that concept of, that whole idea of longevity in politics, the longer you lead, the more, you will find issues that people find it hard to agree with you on. But, I believe I could, if it was just about, can I lead this country forward, certainly the party to electoral success, the answer is yes, but it is much deeper than that, which is what I've been trying to give a sense of today. Who will we have next? Kieran Jenkins.
First Minister, you said, judge me on my record, didn't you? You remember saying that in the context of the education attainment gap between the best and the worst off pupils. Now is surely the time to do that. Do you think you failed those young people?
No, I don't.
You made a promise, you didn't deliver it. The NHS is in a pretty perilous state. Drugs deaths have been catastrophic. When you look back, do you wish it were different, that you could have been more successful in those areas in which you've had complete or considerable control?
Well, I'll refer back to a question one of your colleagues asked me about, anybody taking stock of the things they're proud of, the things they wish they could turn the clock back and do differently, and I'll do that. And you use the terms judge me. One thing I can be absolutely certain of is people will judge me. There's been no shortage of judgments on me and what I've done or not done in office, and I'm pretty certain that will continue. But if you take young people, today, and I remember, possibly including by you, but certainly by plenty in this room, being challenged on this when I became First Minister, about the attainment gap in access to university. Today, we're on track to close that. If you're a young person from a deprived background or a background like the one I come from, you've got a better chance than you've ever had before of going to university. At the other end of the education system, that fundamental investment in expansion, doubling early years childcare and education is transformational. Effects won't be seen immediately, but the effects that will have as children go through the school system are considerable. The NHS, everywhere, health services are under pressure. This country is the only one in the UK that has not faced industrial action in our health service because of our approach to working with those in the service together in partnership to tackle these challenges, and that will continue. So on a whole range of these things, I'll have plenty of time to reflect at greater length, and I'm pretty certain all of you will reflect at length. But one thing is for sure, there will be no shortage of judgment on me and my time as First Minister. Right, I'm going to take a couple more, and Alan Smith from Bauer is the next one.
Thank you, First Minister. You spoke about this has been something you've been thinking about a matter of weeks and not in response to short-term pressures, but at what point did you start to consider it? Was there a particular moment those weeks ago, and who did you have conversations with at that time about whether or not this is the right decision to take?
I've been thinking about it. I used the term in my remarks with oscillating intensity, and that's true. There are some days, I wouldn't have thought about it at all because, frankly, too much else. And then Other times it's weighed more heavily. I don't know, possibly a couple of weeks ago it just started to crystallise a bit more, but it inevitably, again, here's the human thing, it always takes you a bit of time, I think, between the point where probably deep down inside you've made a decision and being able to actually admit that to yourself before you even start telling other people. So I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, except that sitting in the funeral service for Alan yesterday, surrounded by SNP members mourning somebody that 89 years old had campaigned all his life for independence, it did have that clarifying effect that stepping down as leader doesn't mean I stop contributing to the cause of independence. It doesn't mean you stop making a contribution. Everybody has their time, and I think in leadership one of the hardest but one of the most important things to do is know when that time is up. In terms of who I talked about, obviously my close family, the small number of friends. One of the things in leadership you really do learn is who your true friends are in life. And so if you're one of the small number who, mainly because I wouldn't have been able to tell you without crying over the last 24 hours, I didn't phone but texted this morning just before the news broke, know you're one of those friends, and thank you for all your support. And Neil Pooran from PA.
Thanks, First Minister. First of all, can you just confirm if you'll be staying on as an MSP and what kind of issues you'll be campaigning on as an MSP? And also, will the cooperation agreement with the Scottish Green Party need to be renegotiated now if you as First Minister are no longer in that role?
The cooperation agreement stands. I'm not going to try to dictate anything, or at this stage, certainly not now and hopefully not ever, start to issue unsolicited advice to my successor. I know from experience that's not always something that is welcome. Don't report that bit. But I think the cooperation agreement with the Greens has been a thoroughly good thing for the government, for the country, and I would hope to see that continue. Your first question, which yes, I do intend to remain in Parliament. I hope to stay in Parliament till, or intend to stay in Parliament till certainly the next election, and like all MSPs, take a decision about beyond that near the time of the next election. The other body of people, I suppose, that I want to thank, and was hesitant in doing it today in case I started to cry, are my constituents who have supported me through thick and thin, put their trust in me time and again. My constituency party, what was Glasgow Govan, now Glasgow Southside, that have literally been by my side since 1995, and I look forward to continuing to serve my constituency to the best of my ability. I've given some indication of the kind of issues I'll want to be a voice on. There's some very important reform to the criminal justice system coming forward, I know, around improving access to justice for victims of sexual offences. They'll be controversial. Maybe they could be one of the first tests of a more depolarised political debate, but I will be the strongest, most strenuous advocate for these reforms. Young people, care-experienced young people, I certainly will continue to champion that cause. It's one that got under my skin and into my heart in a way that few other issues did over my time as First Minister. Beyond that, we will see. I'm looking forward to new opportunities, new challenges, and just a new way of living life. And perhaps, above all else, that's what I'm most looking forward to, just a different way of living life, catching up with the people, the friends that I've not had much opportunity to spend time with. But watch this space, there's plenty more to come. Right, with that, I'm going to depart from
Watch
now.
this space.
Have you been, or do you expect to be able to do?
And here we have.
I'm not going to.
Let's go a little further with that. This is Sky News' coverage on
politics and in the independence movement. She's the life and soul of that movement, and that makes its future very uncertain.
Just a few close friends got the heads up, including ex-SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford.
Do you worry, though, that this is a setback for those who believe in independence, because she was so central to everything to do with that movement?
I think what has happened today is that we've lost the best leader that we could have had, the best First Minister that Scotland has had. I regret that. I fully understand the reasons why Nicola has taken this decision. We need to make sure, I think all of us have a duty and a responsibility to build on her legacy. The phrase which is often used, that we stand on the shoulders of giants, there's no one that's more true for than for Nicola Sturgeon as the First Minister.
It's been some run since 2014. Taking over from Alex Salmond after defeating the independence referendum, later taking him on when he led a breakaway party. But Nicola Sturgeon kept on winning election after election in Scotland, through Brexit, through COVID, as Prime Ministers came and went. Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, Rishi Sunak is her fifth, each one dismissing her calls for a second independence referendum. The Prime Minister thanked her today for her long-standing service. On policy, she brought in more free childcare and payments for the poorest families, and said her defining mission...
It matters so much to me that I've done something politicians don't often do. I've put my own neck on the line.
...was to close the gap between the best and worst off pupils in schools.
You said, judge me on my record, didn't you? You remember saying that. When you look back, do you wish it were different, that you could have been more successful in those areas?
And your tributes to Nicola Sturgeon?
Look, I think it's important to recognise that Nicola Sturgeon has been at the forefront of Scottish politics for some 20 years. She's led us through some of the most challenging periods in our country's history, the pandemic being a good example of that. And whilst I've got lots of disagreements with her, whilst I've had lots of arguments with her over the years, I'm sure I'll have arguments in the future, that level of service, I think, is worthy of respect, but also a thank you.
Do you see this as an opportunity?
Look, it's of course an opportunity to think about new ideas and a new vision for our country, but I think it is an important moment to recognise and respect the role that Nicola Sturgeon has played, but to also say that a different future is possible, change is possible, but that's perhaps for another day when I want to make the case for what I think a Labour government can achieve both for Scotland but for the wider UK.
I mean, Labour seems to be pushing the Conservatives into third place in this country. I mean, you're obviously benefiting from the Starmer effect in England.
Well, look, we've benefited a lot from the Keir Starmer effect. I think we benefited from the Boris Johnson effect. I think we benefited from the Liz Truss effect. I think we benefited from the fact that people think that many occasions both governments have felt a bit out of touch. But what I've said clearly to my own party, and I'll continue to say publicly, is the easy part in politics is to talk about why your opponents deserve to lose. The hard part in politics is to persuade people why you deserve to win, and that's the part that I'm more interested in as we lead into the next general election, is making the positive case about why we need a Labour government across the country.
And on the current controversy around gender recognition reform, which Nicola Sturgeon herself said had sort of become, that she'd become a sort of a polarising figure in that, you actually agree with her?
Look, I agree in the need to remove the inhumanities in the process of obtaining a GRC. I still think there's clarity required in terms of protection of single-sex spaces based on biological sex in the appropriate circumstances, much greater safeguarding required. But were we right to support removing those inhumanities? I absolutely stand by that.
Right. I mean, we had John Nicholson sort of dismiss the polls, and you seem to be being very cautious actually about your own position here. But the truth is, you know, Labour MPs in Scotland could be vital to any Labour government, because it may not be a majority in England.
Well, I would go further than that. I mean, I'm not sure I agree with John's 20% divide, but we can argue about the numbers another time. I think it's more than vital. I think it's essential. I don't think you get a UK Labour government unless you get a significant number of seats in Scotland. I know Keir Starmer believes the same. I know he wants to be a Prime Minister for all parts of the United Kingdom. That means having significant seats in Scotland, but we're not complacent about that. We've got work to do, and we want to make sure Scotland helps lead the way to elect a UK Labour government.
Anna Sawa, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's bring in the Conservatives leader in Scotland, Douglas Ross. Well, if Anna Sawa has been rather gracious about Nicola Sturgeon, I mean, your tweets so far don't seem to be on the same lines. Can you hear me, Douglas Ross? I don't think Douglas Ross can hear me, so let me bring back in... well, let's talk about how this plays out then, in terms of a successor. You have established figures like Angus Robertson. Is that the kind of the answer to the SNP's problem?
Well, no one person is ever an answer to a political party. Political parties are made up of numerous individuals, as you know. There's a number, you don't want me to fall into the cliche of saying there's a number of talented people, all of whom...
But is he the front runner?
Well, the bookies have Angus Robertson as the front runner today. It has to be a member of the Scottish Parliament. It has to be an MSP, so it cannot be an MP. It's a question of who the party chooses, and then of course Holyrood then has to choose as a parliament and decide who it wants as the First Minister. Incidentally, I don't dismiss the polls as you suggested. Every politician pays attention to polls and would be fibbing if they didn't. I just remark that the polls show Nicola Sturgeon clearly ahead.
But isn't the truth that you're going in as a party into this conference next month with a lot of you disagreeing with Nicola Sturgeon when it comes to treating the next election as a referendum, because as the polls are suggesting, a lot of voters don't like it?
In my adult lifetime, unionist politicians at Westminster have always accepted Scotland's right to leave the Union. This is the first time in my lifetime that they've not accepted that right, or not at least agreed how we can leave the Union. That undoubtedly poses challenges for those of us who believe in parliamentary democracy.
Right, but do you think I was going to do a U-turn on this question of treating it as a...
I don't know. I think we're going to have a discussion and work out where we go from here.
Let's bring in Douglas Ross, who I think can now hear us. Douglas Ross, are you there?
I am, yes, I can hear you.
Right, so, I mean, what would you like to say about Nicola Sturgeon's time? I mean, we heard Anna Sawa paying tribute to her. Would you do the same?
Well, I pay tribute to the fact that she's led Scotland for over 8 years. She's Scotland's first female First Minister. But I can't just forget about her record in government, which has been one of failure, focusing more on separating Scotland from the rest of the UK than tackling the drug desk scandal, than building ferries for communities that see these as vital infrastructure links, for ensuring that our education remained world class. It's actually gone down the international ranking. So these things do fall at the First Minister's door, and over 8 years she's prioritised her party's commitment to separating Scotland than delivering for the whole of Scotland.
Why do you think she's so popular then and you're falling into third place?
Well, clearly, I think John Nicholson was just saying polls go up and down, and what we've seen recently is Nicola Sturgeon's own personal approval and the SNP's approval falling. They have rushed through the gender recognition reform bill, where Nicola Sturgeon got to the stage that 12 times when I asked her if a double rapist was a man or a woman, couldn't answer. She couldn't get herself out of that hole, and on that issue and many others, in this case supported by Labour and the Liberal Democrats, on GRR, they were on the wrong side of public opinion.
So you think she's gone because she was getting it wrong?
Well, yes, I do believe that. Clearly, it's had a personal toll being in office for this long, not just as First Minister, but Deputy First Minister, and before that, Health Secretary. But there is no denying that on key policies and the key political issue that we've been debating in Scotland for the last few weeks, I think Nicola Sturgeon got it completely wrong, and those parties who supported her.
Let me just get John Nicholson to answer that.
Well, just enormously ungracious from Douglas Ross. The Tories haven't won an election in Scotland since the 1950s. He's sadly, I suppose from his perspective, one of the least popular politicians in Scotland. He would give his eye teeth for the kind of popularity ratings that Nicola Sturgeon has.
Douglas Ross?
Well, at least I'm on these rankings. John Nicholson is not, but that would be getting petty if I was to get into that argument. Look, I'm a political opponent to Nicola Sturgeon. Personally, we've never really got on with each other, but I do recognise her commitment to the job, her commitment to being First Minister of Scotland, but it would be wrong of me to try and hide what I think are major failings that she has overseen in her time as First Minister of Scotland, and before that as Health Secretary and Deputy First Minister. For a decade and a half, the SNP have been in charge in Scotland, and despite being the most powerful devolved administration in the world with record budgets, they have overseen failure after failure after failure.
We're such a powerful devolved administration that Westminster can step in and decide if they don't like bits of our legislation passed with all party support, including the support of the Labour Party at Holyrood. She is the towering political figure of the post-war era in Scotland. She goes at a time of her own choosing, enormously popular, with a huge raft of achievements.
John Nicholson, thank you very much. Douglas Ross, thank you for joining us too. Well, Nicola Sturgeon's departure has potentially major implications for the Conservatives, but particularly for Labour, as they seek to claw back the Westminster seats lost to the SNP during her time as leader. Our policy correspondent Paul McNamara is in Westminster now. What's the reaction been there, Paul?
Well, there's been a lot of navel-gazing among Tory MPs trying to work out if this is good or bad for them. And where they all seem to be landing is, well, they can't quite work out if they'll get a few extra votes from this. What they do know is that Labour has the potential to pick up a lot of extra votes. This is potentially very good news for Labour, which means by default it could be bad news for the Conservatives. And among Labour MPs and a fair few people in the shadow cabinet, there is a growing sense of excitement. Look, cast your mind back to just before the general election in 2015. Labour had 41 MPs from Scotland. Today, they've got just one. Now, there's various reasons for that, not least because Labour campaigned to keep the union together during the independence referendum. But, as you heard from Anna Sarwar there is a recognition that part of the popularity, possibly a great big part of the popularity of the SNP over recent years, has been down to Nicola Sturgeon. Now, throw in a different leader, perhaps someone a little bit less well known, someone a little bit less polished on the campaign trail, all at the time while Labour is in the ascendancy, and all of a sudden you've got a lot of Labour MPs telling me that they fancy their chances of taking a dent into SNP territory. There is, of course, one other reason for a bit of extra Labour excitement today, and that's because way before all this kicked off with Nicola Sturgeon this morning at around 9 a.m, the current Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, said that the former Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, could not stand as a Labour candidate at the next general election. As one MP texted me earlier on, we've got rid of Corbyn, and because we've got rid of Sturgeon on the same day too, nobody's even talking about it. Great.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn could still run as an independent, couldn't we? I mean, couldn't he? Do we know anything about whether he's planning to do that?
Yeah, in the last hour, he's released a statement. He criticises the current Labour leadership. He says it should be down to local Labour members who represents them at an election. It's about 200 words, and what he doesn't do in it is actually...
And that's another story. We actually may cover that coming days, maybe tomorrow. How the resignation, this one is from firstpost.com. How the resignation of Scotland's Nicola Sturgeon is rooted in transgender rights. Scotland First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, who's been in power since 2014, announced her resignation on Wednesday. Her moves come at a time when she feels backlash over a law that allowed trans people to easily change their legal gender. On 15 February, Nicola Sturgeon shocked United Kingdom's politics when she announced that she was standing down as Scottish National Party leader and Scotland's First Minister after 8 years. The 52-year-old leader said she knew in my head and in my heart this was time to step down. The longest-serving First Minister and the first woman said she'd remain in office until her successor was elected. While many dubbed Sturgeon's move as shocking, it didn't really come as a surprise. Her party's poll rating, as well as her own, had been dropping in recent months. Moreover, she faced pressure over her husband, Peter Morell's £107,000 loan to the party. To add to her long list of woes was her relaxed transgender laws, the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. The straw that it seems that broke the camel's back was allowing a rapist to be sent to a female prison. Sturgeon, however, alluding to these in her resignation, said that the decision to quit was not a reaction to short-term pressures, adding that she'd been wrestling with the decision for several weeks now, saying she'd had to consider the physical and mental impact of leading the country after being in charge since 2014. As Scotland now deliberates on their new leader, let's take a closer look at how Sturgeon's transgender policy was her final undoing.
Let's try and unpack that for a second. Let's try and de-emotionalize this for a second. Let's try and intellectualize this for a second. Let's try and rationalize this for a second.
What was the Gender Recognition Reform Bill? In December last year, the Scottish Parliament passed a bill that would reform the system through which people could apply for their Gender Recognition Certificate, GRC. This new bill lowered the age to apply for the same from 18 to 16. It also eliminated the need for a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria. the feeling of distress caused by a mismatch between assigned gender and gender identity, which can be costly and challenging to attain. Applicants above the age of 18 would also be allowed to be recognized in what Scotland calls their acquired gender after 3 months living in it. 16 and 17-year-olds would need to wait 6 months. The bill also provided that people would send their applications to the Registrar General for the Scotland instead of the UK panel. This was a massive change from the previous system in which people had to provide 2 medical reports and live in their acquired gender for 2 years. In passing the bill, the Scottish government, led by Sturgeon, had said that the old system adversely impacted people applying for gender recognition, adding that the process of getting the GRC can be demeaning, intrusive, distressing, and stressful. Supporters of the bill said it would be a simpler and fairer way for transgender men and women to be legally recognized as who they truly were. The Scottish government at the time said that the legislation empowered trans people, giving them more liberty to change their gender. What was the objection to the gender recognition reform bill? While many hailed Sturgeon and her government for the reforms, it wasn't well received by everyone. Some argued that simplification would fundamentally alter who can access women-only services and leave them vulnerable to abuse by predatory male offenders. They argued that the bill could jeopardize women and children's safety, as it would make it easier for men or two men to access single-sex spaces such as bathrooms and changing rooms. J.K. Rowling, the woman behind the Harry Potter series, was perhaps one of the most vocal critics of the bill, saying that the legislation would in effect mean that all man needs to do to become a woman is to say he's one. Even the Rishi Sunak government in Britain blocked the legislation, which it believed was not compatible with the existing Equalities Act. The UK government, Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack, invoked a section of the Scotland Act that allows London to veto Scottish legislation that impacts matters that are considered reserved for the UK Parliament. What was the trans woman rapist row? Even as Sturgeon fumed over Rishi Sunak's government blocking the legislation, calling the move as a frontal attack on our elected Scottish Parliament, she faced a tough time at home over the Isla Bryson case. But who is Isla Bryson, and what was the matter? Isla Bryson, a trans woman formerly known as Adam Graham, was convicted in the late January of raping 2 women in Scotland in 2016 and 2019 and was sent to Cornton Vale Women's Prison in Stirling. Bryson's incarceration at an all-women prison stirred outrage. Many argued that Bryson only decided to declare herself as a trans woman after appearing in court on a rape charge. In fact, Bryson's mother said she was disgusted by Isla's behavior and that she'd given no indication of being transgender as a child. Speaking to the Mail, Janet Bryson had said, "I don't know why it took him until he was in his 20s to say he wanted to become a woman, but I understand why some people think it's just a way of getting out of going to a male prison." Many slammed the Sturgeon government on the matter, with Russell Finlay, a Conservative member of Scottish Parliament, telling Yahoo News, "This rapist decided that he was no longer a man only after appearing in court on a rape charge. We now have the utterly perverse situation where a Scottish court refers to someone who says he identifies as a female using her penis to rape 2 vulnerable women. We warn of the inevitability of this happening if the SNP's gender self-ID law passed, but for it to have become a reality is deeply worrying and an affront to the victims." Following the mass outrage, Bryson was removed from the women's prison. Sturgeon refused 4 times to say whether she thought Bryson was a woman, despite her previous stance on self-identification. But it seemed the damage was done, and we probably saw the effect of it on Wednesday when Sturgeon decided to step down. This is Nigel Farage's take on it.
And that was going to be the big story of the day until rumours went around that Nicola Sturgeon was about to resign as the First Minister in Scotland. Indeed, just after 11 o'clock, she gave her press conference. Interesting that she said I, me, or my 153 times, but only mentioned Scotland 11 times. That, to me, was quite telling. But she's done. She's gone. She pushed it too far. Her trans intransigence, in the end, is what did for her. Yes, quite extraordinary. She wanted 16-year-olds without any medical consultation to be able to change their gender. And then it all happened, didn't it? A male double rapist turns up in court wearing a wig and is due to be sent to a women's prison. And over 80% of Scotland says, no, we don't want that. And Labour start to rise in the polls. Support for separation begins to fall. Stories about SNP money, her own husband's behaviour and non-declaration of loans, and the whole thing unravels, and she's gone. I think it's very good news. It's very good news for those of us who believe in the Christian roots of our society. Very good for those of us that believe in the family as being a rather important unit. Very good news for all of us who believe in small c conservative principles, because we see daily headlines that make us very, very upset, nervous, worried about the future. Yet what you've seen in Scotland is proof that the pendulum can swing back, that actually the silent majority in the end can have their way. So I think it's been a very good day. It's been a very sunny day, and in particular, my view is it's been a particularly good day for Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. But tell me, what do you think? How much damage has this done to the cause of Scottish separation? Well, let's go straight to Holyrood and join Darren McCaffrey, GB News' political editor. Darren, a pretty remarkable day for Keir Starmer is my take on.
And George Galloway.
Centrist idiots crying into their oat lattes about the way going of Nicola Sturgeon, for so many long years the First Minister of Scotland, and for many years before that, the Second Minister in Scotland. It seems that she has been with us forever, as we have sunk ever deeper in the social, political and economic malaise that is today's Scotland. Sure, she knew her pronouns, although her new pronouns are was and were. She knew the buttons to push for the liberality in the South and in Europe, but in fact she presided over an almost tyrannical administration in Scotland. And you can see that in the betting for her successor. Nobody else is over 3% because she was all-powerful. She and her rather shadowy husband, one Peter Murrell, who was the General Secretary, is the General Secretary of the ruling party. A husband and wife team not seen since Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu's, though in this case the pants were on the... although you never know, you can't know what's in people's bedrooms. But the shadowy Peter Murrell is currently under police investigation over murky goings-on in the SNP's accounts, where £800,000 were lent to the party by Peter Murrell. A singular decision. Nicola, his wife, knew nothing about it, only from his resources, though where he got those resources will be quite a tall tale to summon. That may have been the reason for her resignation, or it may have been evidence about to emerge in the emails that were inadvertently dropped into a Russian letterbox by the madly anti-Russian NATO fanatic SNP defence spokesman. I've not yet seen the details of what he was doing, putting things through that letterbox, but that is what has happened. Now those emails are stolen property, just like the MP's expenses were stolen property when the Daily Telegraph published them. But sometimes it's in the public interest to publish what you find on stolen property. And Craig Murray, the Honourable Craig Murray, who else? The former ambassador to Uzbekistan is now in full possession of these emails. He's a bosom buddy, perhaps I shouldn't put it that way, of Alex Salmond. And he is ready to publish at least those he and his legal team consider to be in the public interest to publish. Perhaps there's something in those emails that was the proximate reason for Nicola Sturgeon's entirely unexpected, uncharted, and surprise resignation this morning in a 55-minute resignation speech, longer than the resignations of almost any elected officer ever on earth. Nicola Sturgeon got one thing after another wrong. It's not just that Alex Salmond was fitted up by supporters of Nicola Sturgeon, was sent into prison for what might have been the rest of his life, but for the wisdom of a majority women jury at the High Court in Edinburgh, the kind of jury trial that Nicola Sturgeon's government then tried to abolish. Luckily, or you'd never have seen or heard of Alex Salmond again, and she might still be in power. It wasn't just these three things. The two ferries that the SNP commissioned have now cost more than the Scottish Parliament building itself. Yet neither is remotely seaworthy. And the shipping scandal is not the worst of it. There's the aluminium smelter scandal that may cost the Scottish people literally billions of pounds over the next 30 years because of the, well, let's be charitable, utterly, shamefully, shamelessly incompetent deal that Nicola Sturgeon drove with a dodgy Indian businessman up there in Invergordon. He's not in Invergordon, of course, but the smelter is. The jobs were supposed to be, but no jobs materialized, and no aluminium either. But it wasn't just those things either. It was not just the so-called hate crimes bill, which, I kid you not, dear viewer, could have seen everybody at my Christmas dinner table prosecuted for hate speech in a private house, in my case, in my own private house. Because amongst many other items of conversation were the issues which may very well have been the final straw for Nicola Sturgeon's government. I refer, of course, to her ludicrous Gender Recognition Act, which inexplicably was not just rammed through, forced through by a nationalist government. One would have thought intent, by definition, on maximizing the number of people in the nation that would unite behind its one single raison d'etre, the independence of Scotland, was not just rammed through by a nationalist government, but was given wings and pushed through almost unanimously by the so-called Labour Party in Scotland, led by a Muslim, and by the so-called Scottish Liberal Party. Even a couple of Conservative members of the Scottish Parliament voted for it. In that Gender Recognition Act, I probably don't need to tell you, men can become women, not by the wave of a wand, but the wag of their tongue, just by saying that they are now a woman, they become a woman. It was cheered to the rafters by all these so-called progressives, but it has run into the wall of the Scottish people's common sense.
Well, is this nothing you talk about?
The first wall was gender-specific toilets. There's a lot of women, my own wife, my own daughters included, who prefer, thanks very much, to go to a ladies' toilet and don't want to see a man identifying as a woman waving his hopefully flaccid dick around in front of them in the lavatory. And then it was the changing rooms of the swimming pools, where ditto, many women like to swim alone. They certainly like to shower alone. They certainly like to get changed alone, rather than the aforementioned self-declaring women with dicks. The next barrier into which it ran was in shop changing rooms. But the last of the barriers may turn out to have been the most significant. That barrier, and if you think about it, was not just predictable, was not just predicted, but was literally ineluctable, could not possibly be avoided. A double rapist who was a man when he raped 2 women, transitioned, he said, while on remand, and emerged in a blonde wig for his sentencing as a woman, and therefore, under Nicola Sturgeon's law, had to be sent to a women's prison, where presumably the wig would have fallen off, the dick would have been out, and the fellow prisoners and warders would be in danger of being raped, just like the other 2 women that this miserable creature was convicted of raping. First, Nicola Sturgeon into the wall of the Scottish people's common sense. The first wall was gender-specific toilets. There's a lot of women, my own wife, my own daughters included, who prefer, thanks very much, to go to a ladies' toilet and don't want to see a man identifying as a woman waving his hopefully flaccid dick around in front of them in the lavatory. And then it was women like to swim alone. They certainly like to shower alone. Aforementioned self-declaring women with dicks. They shop changing rooms. But the last of the barriers may turn out to have been the most significant. That barrier, and if you think about it, was not just predictable, was not just predicted, but was literally ineluctable, could not possibly be avoided. A double rapist who was a man when he raped 2 women, transitioned, he said, while on remand, and emerged in a blonde wig for his sentencing as a woman, and therefore, under Nicola Sturgeon's law, had to be sent to a woman's prison. Creature was convicted of raping. At first, Nicola Sturgeon stuck to her guns. If she is a woman, then she must be held on the female prison estate. So horrendous was the outcry amongst the Scottish public, the workforce in the jails, the relatives of convicts in the women's jails, that she had to U-turn, accept. She continued to call him she. She continued to insist that he, the rapist, the double rapist, was a woman and was merely temporarily going to be housed on the male prison estate. You see where all this is going? It's going up the fundament of all the progressives and liberals who've championed this madness right from the beginning. And the parties, plural, the SNP, the Green Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrat Party, who championed it with Nicola Sturgeon, should all be tendering their resignations right now along with hers. I wish I could go into the hatefulness of the supposedly civic nationalism of the SNP, founded by fascist sympathizers in the 1930s, interned for collaborating with Hitler when the Second World War began, later to emerge as the president of the SNP, and every year until now, an award in his honor, the Arthur Donaldson Prize, is given to high Hedians in the Scottish nationalist movement. I wish I could debunk and shake you out of this fatuous, foolish affiliation with Scottish nationalism. Scottish nationalism is no different to any of the other nasty nationalisms in developed imperialist countries. But Nicola Sturgeon and her way going, presumably into the international commentariat or administration in the EU or any of these other NGO hangouts that earn you hundreds of thousands a year, will not be the end of Scottish nationalism, and therefore I will not be able to cease to think and talk about it. But let me turn to the other big issues that are affecting, bigger issues that are affecting all of us today.
And remember that your engagement through a like, a share, and a subscribe will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Watch this space. We'll be back.